I hired a plumber to fix a leak at my son's house while he and his wife were away for the weekend. The plumber called me 40 minutes after I dropped him off. His voice was quiet, almost like he didn't want whoever was nearby to hear him. "Sir," he said, "there's a little girl up here, in the back bedroom. She's alone." I told him I'd be there in 10 minutes. I made it in 7. My name is not important. What matters is that I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years as a middle school principal in Columbus, Ohio. And I know what a child in distress looks like. I've seen it across a cafeteria, across a parking lot, across a classroom window. You develop a sense for it after long enough. You wish you didn't have to. My son. I'll call him by what he's always been to me, which is my boy, though he stopped acting like it a long time ago. Bought that house 3 years ago with his wife. She's a woman I tried to like. I genuinely tried. She was polite in the way that people are polite when they want something from you. Smiled at the right moments. Complimented my cooking once at Thanksgiving, even though I could see her push the food around the plate. I told myself, this is who we chose. You respect that. He has a daughter from his first marriage. Her name is Gracie. She was 6 years old at the time I'm telling you about, and she had a mother's eyes. Wide, dark brown, the kind that see everything and give away nothing because they've learned it's safer that way. Her mother, my son's first wife, passed away when Gracie was 3. Ovarian cancer, fast and unforgiving. She was 31 years old. I went to the funeral, and I held that little girl in my lap for most of it, because she didn't fully understand where her mother had gone. Only that the day was sad, and that everyone kept squeezing her too hard when they hugged her. After the funeral, my son received a life insurance payout, substantial, enough that he wouldn't need to work for a year if he chose not to. There was also a small policy specifically designated for Gracie. Her mother had set it up, added to it every month since Gracie was born, because that's the kind of woman she was, thoughtful about the future, even when the future was uncertain. That money was meant to be used for Gracie. Education, medical, whatever she needed growing up. I want you to keep that in mind. The pipe under the kitchen sink had been dripping for 2 weeks. My son had mentioned it on the phone, not as a request, just as a complaint, the way he complained about most things that required effort, and I offered to send someone over. He and his wife were going to Nashville for a long weekend, a concert, some restaurants, a hotel that cost more per night than my first car payment. I said I'd handle the plumber. He said sure. Thanks. See you when we get back. I arranged it for Saturday afternoon. The plumber? A decent man named Walt, been in business in our neighborhood for 15 years. Called me while I was at the grocery store. I thought he was going to tell me the damage was worse than expected. Maybe a corroded pipe. Maybe we needed to open the wall. That's what I was bracing for. Instead, he said, "There's a little girl up here. She's alone." When I walked through the front door of that house, Walt was standing at the bottom of the stairs. He pointed up without saying anything. His face had the look of a man who wasn't sure what the right move was, and had decided to wait for someone else to make it. I went upstairs. The back bedroom. The one that had been my son's home office before the marriage, before the move, before everything, had a folding door, the kind with the slats that never quite close all the way. It was latched from the outside with one of those little hook and eye catches you use for a screen door, something a child could not open from the inside. I unlatched it. Gracie was sitting on a sleeping bag in the corner. She had a stuffed rabbit in her lap that had been washed so many times it had no color left. There was a plastic cup on the floor, empty. A sleeve of crackers, mostly gone. A small flashlight that had been left on so long the batteries were nearly dead. A bucket. She looked at me, and she didn't cry. That was the part that got me worst. She didn't cry. She just looked at me with those dark eyes and said, "Grandpa, I'm really thirsty." I picked her up. I held her. Walt was already on the phone. I didn't ask who he was calling. I didn't stop him. I need to back up and tell you about the year leading up to that Saturday, because what I found in that room didn't come from nowhere. These things never do. There's always a trail, and when you look back, you see it clearly, and you hate yourself a little for not looking harder when it mattered. My son had changed after his second marriage. That's the most honest way I can put it. He'd always been a little self-focused. His mother, God rest her, used to joke that he came into the world looking for a mirror. But it was manageable when he was young. A lot of young men are like that. You hope they grow out of it. He didn't exactly. He just got better at covering it. His wife had no patience for Gracie. She wasn't cruel in obvious ways, not at first. She didn't yell. She didn't hit. What she did was more like a slow erasure. Gracie's drawings came off the refrigerator. Her bedroom got moved from the front of the house to the back. She stopped being included in photos. At Christmas, the presents were wrapped differently. Her wife's children from a previous relationship, 2 teenagers who barely acknowledged anyone, got boxes with ribbon and fancy paper, while Gracie's gifts were in grocery bags with tissue paper stuffed on top. I noticed. I said something to my son once, carefully over lunch. He told me I was reading too much into things. He said his wife loved Gracie in her own way. He said some people are less demonstrative. I looked at him across the table and I thought, you know, and you're pretending not to. I brought Gracie to my place on weekends when I could. She was easy company, the way kids are when they're smart and observant. She didn't demand to be entertained. She just wanted to be near someone. She'd sit at my kitchen table and draw while I read. She started calling me Pop somewhere around her 5th birthday, and I never corrected it. It became the best word I knew. About 4 months before that Saturday, the weekends stopped. My son said they were busy. He said Gracie had activities. I pushed twice, politely, and the third time he told me, not unkindly, but firmly, that I needed to let them run their own household. I backed off. I told myself it was a phase. I didn't push hard enough. I have to say that out loud because it's true. When the police arrived, Gracie was sitting at my kitchen table. Walt had driven us both to my house, 8 minutes away, drinking a glass of water and eating a bowl of cereal. She'd asked for Lucky Charms specifically, which I didn't have, so I gave her Cheerios with a spoonful of honey stirred in, and she accepted this as a reasonable substitute. She told the officer, calmly, that she had been in the room for 2 days, that her stepmother had put her there Friday morning before they left, that she'd been given crackers and water and told not to make noise, that if she was good and quiet, she could come out when they got back. She asked if she was in trouble. The officer, young woman, maybe 28, I watched her face while Gracie talked, and I will never forget the way she held it steady even when her jaw tightened. Told Gracie she was not in trouble at all, that she had done nothing wrong, that she was very brave. Gracie looked at her Cheerios and said, I tried not to use the bucket too much. I had to leave the room. I stood in my hallway with my hand on the wall, and I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I won't say more than that. They reached my son in Nashville that evening. I was told he expressed shock and denied knowing Gracie had been left alone. I was told he said it calmly. I was told his wife said nothing. A family member, who has since told me what happened in that hotel room, said he sat on the edge of the bed after the call and was quiet for a long time. Then he said, we need to get ahead of this. Not, is she okay? Not, I need to get to her. Not anything a father says. We need to get ahead of this. They drove back Sunday morning. By then, Gracie was asleep in my guest room, and I had spoken with a family law attorney, whose card I'd had in my wallet for a year. A friend had once told me I might need it, and I'd been too optimistic to believe her. My son came to my house that afternoon. He looked tired and he looked rehearsed, which is a particular kind of look I'd learned to recognize over 30 years of dealing with students who'd had all weekend to prepare their story. He said there had been a miscommunication. He said he'd believed his wife had made arrangements for Gracie to stay with a friend from school. He said he was devastated. He used the word devastated twice. I looked at him. This person I'd driven to baseball practice and help with algebra, and sat beside in the emergency room at 2 in the morning when he was 16 and had done something stupid, and I said, she asked me if she was in trouble. That was the first thing she said. He started to say something. I said, she'd been in that room for 2 days, son. She had a bucket. He didn't finish his sentence. The custody case took 4 months. I want to be honest about that. It wasn't immediate, it wasn't clean, and there were days when I wasn't certain how it would go. My son hired an attorney who was very good at making paperwork complicated. His wife said in her deposition that Gracie had asked to stay behind, that she had said she didn't want to come to Nashville, that they had left food and water and expected her to be fine for one night. She said one night, even though the neighbors and the hotel records established clearly that they had been gone since Friday morning and did not return until Sunday afternoon. She was good in the deposition, calm, specific, credible sounding. I understood in that moment why my son had married her. But here's what she couldn't explain, and what her attorney couldn't explain either. The hook and eye latch on the outside of the door. That latch had not been there when my son bought the house. I knew because I had helped him move in. I had been in every room. There was no latch on that door. Someone had installed it. And that someone had done it deliberately, and recently enough that the screws were still clean. The prosecutor called it premeditation. She used that word quietly and precisely, the way you use something sharp. There's something I need to tell you about the money, because it matters, and because I was one of the few people who knew about it. Gracie's mother had set up a small account. It wasn't enormous, about $40,000, designated specifically for Gracie's expenses: medical, educational, general welfare. My son had access to the account as custodial parent. That's standard. That's how these things work when a parent passes and the surviving parent has custody. Over the 3 years since the death, that account had been drawn down to less than $2,000. I found this out through Gracie's maternal grandmother, her mother's mother, a woman named Eunice who lived in Portland and had been shut out of Gracie's life almost entirely after the second marriage. Eunice had been tracking the account because she'd contributed to it. She'd been watching the balance drop for 2 years and didn't know what to do with what she was seeing. She called me 2 days after Gracie came to stay with me. She cried on the phone. She said she was sorry she hadn't said something sooner. I told her she wasn't the only one. The records showed the withdrawals, home renovation, a vacation, car payment, not Gracie's college fund, a lease payment on a German SUV, spa services, restaurant charges, $40,000 that a dying woman had set aside for her daughter. When the judge saw those records, she was still the kind of still that isn't calm. It's the kind that means someone is deciding how many words to use and has settled on very few. Gracie slept at my house every night for the 4 months of the case. She enrolled in the school 3 blocks away. She joined a Saturday art class at the community center and came home with paintings she'd taped to my refrigerator. Big, colorful, confident paintings the way kids paint when they feel safe enough to take up space. She stopped flinching when someone moved quickly nearby. It took about 6 weeks. She started leaving her shoes anywhere instead of lined up perfectly by the door. It took about 3 weeks. I know what that means. I spent 31 years watching children relax when they finally felt secure. She still called me Pop. One evening in late October, she was doing homework at the kitchen table, and she looked up and said, "Pop, is my dad going to jail?" I sat down across from her. I thought about what to say, and I said the truth, which was, I don't know exactly what will happen, but what I do know is that you're safe, and that's not going to change. She looked at me for a moment. Then she said, "Okay," and went back to her homework. Kids are extraordinary. I don't say that sentimentally. I say it because it's genuinely remarkable, the way they locate solid ground and stand on it. They don't overthink it. They feel it, and they move. The judge awarded me full legal and physical custody of Gracie. This is not a common outcome. Courts are generally reluctant to remove a child from a biological parent entirely. But the evidence was not ambiguous. The latch, the $40,000, the 2 days, the bucket, the hotel records, my son's own text messages, which included one sent to his wife at 11:47 p.m. on Friday night that said, "She'll be fine until Sunday. He'll be fine until Sunday." talking about his 6-year-old daughter latched in a back room. His parental rights were terminated. That also is not common, and it is not small. It means something final. I'm not going to pretend I felt nothing when I heard it. I felt grief underneath the relief, because there's no version of that outcome that isn't also a loss, including for Gracie, who will have to make sense of it someday in her own way. My son received a suspended sentence with 3 years of probation and mandatory parenting classes, which strikes me as a mild consequence, and strikes several people I respect as also a mild consequence. His wife received 60 days, served on weekends, and 3 years probation as well. I have said everything I have to say to my son. I said it in a letter I wrote over 4 drafts across 2 weeks. I will not summarize it here because it was private. What I will say is that I mailed it and I received no response, and I have decided that is the last correspondence between us. Eunice flew in from Portland for the custody hearing. Afterward, we had lunch, the 3 of us, Gracie and Eunice and me, at a diner near the courthouse. Eunice had brought Gracie a photo album, photos of her mother as a little girl, as a teenager, as a young woman. Photos I had never seen. Gracie sat in the booth and turned the pages slowly. She didn't say much. At one point, she stopped at a photo of her mother at maybe 8 years old, holding a rabbit, a real rabbit, gray, ears straight up, and she looked at it for a long time. Then she looked at Eunice and said, "She looks like me." Eunice said, "She looks exactly like you." Gracie nodded, satisfied, and turned the page. I sat across from them, and I thought about 31 years of middle schoolers coming into my office. Sad and confused and sometimes angry, and the only thing that ever actually helped any of them was the same thing. One adult who showed up and kept showing up. That's it. That's the whole secret. There's no program or policy or intervention that replaces it. I drove home with Gracie asleep in the back seat, and her stuffed rabbit, the old one, colorless, tucked under her chin. And I thought, I'm 63 years old and I'm starting over. And I thought, good, it has been 14 months since that Saturday. Gracie is 7 now, almost 8. She lost her 2 front teeth within 3 weeks of each other and was deeply annoyed by this, and I found it, privately, one of the funniest and most wonderful things I'd ever witnessed. She has started reading chapter books and will tell you at length about any book she's currently reading, whether or not you've asked. She talks to Eunice on video call every Sunday. Eunice sends her books in the mail. Gracie reads them and reports back. She's in 2nd grade. Her teacher told me at the fall conference that Gracie was one of the most empathetic kids she'd taught in 15 years. That she was the first to notice if someone was upset. That she would go sit next to them, quietly, without making a production of it. I told her teacher. She learned that somewhere. A good friend asked me not long ago whether I was angry, whether I blamed myself for not seeing it sooner, whether I wished things had been different. I said yes to all 3. I said the anger lives in a particular place in my chest, and I've learned to leave it there without feeding it. I said I carry the guilt of those months I didn't push harder, and I've decided the most useful thing I can do with it is stay awake now. And I said I would give anything for Gracie to have her mother, for any version of this story where that little girl has her mother. But that's not the story we have. The story we have is a plumber named Walt called me on a Saturday afternoon, and because of that call, Gracie has a home. She put a drawing on my refrigerator last week. 4 figures. A small girl, a tall man with white hair, a woman labeled Grandma Eunice, and a rabbit labeled Marshmallow. She'd written across the top in her 2nd grade handwriting, careful and proud, "My family." I left it on the refrigerator. I've been thinking about cause and effect a lot lately. Not in any grand philosophical way, just the simple, honest version of it that you see when you've lived long enough and paid enough attention. Every outcome has a trail leading back to it. Every result was built, piece by piece, by the choices people made when they thought no one was looking. My son made his choices. He chose comfort over responsibility, convenience over conscience, again and again, in ways that seemed small until they weren't. He chose to look away when Gracie's drawings came off the refrigerator. He chose not to ask where the money was going. He chose to send a text at 11:47 at night saying, "She'll be fine until Sunday," and then go to sleep. None of those were accidents. They were decisions. And decisions accumulate. They become a record. And eventually, a record becomes a verdict. What I want to say, and I want to say it plainly, without wrapping it in anything soft, is that intelligence without conscience is just a tool for rationalizing. My son is not a stupid man. He knew what was happening in that house. He could follow the logic of consequences when it served him. What he lacked was an intellect. It was the willingness to use it honestly, to look at what he was doing and call it what it was, that gap between knowing and doing right. That's where character lives, and his had been hollowing out for years. Gracie, on the other hand, that little girl had been given every reason to shut down. And instead, she kept reaching. She kept drawing. She kept asking questions. She kept going to school and making friends, and noticing when someone nearby was sad. 2 days in a locked room, and the first thing she asked me was whether she was in trouble. Not because she was weak, but because she'd been taught to absorb blame. It took her about 6 weeks to stop flinching. It took her 3 weeks to start leaving her shoes anywhere, instead of lined up perfectly by the door. Those two things tell you everything about what she'd been surviving, and everything about her resilience. I spent 31 years in education, and I'll tell you what I believe. Resilience isn't something you're born with in a fixed amount. It grows when someone shows up. That's it. It grows in the presence of a consistent adult, one who doesn't leave, who doesn't make love conditional, who shows up Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday and every day after that, without requiring the child to earn it. Eunice showed up from Portland. Walt showed up when it mattered most, in the plainest and most ordinary way imaginable, by simply calling me. I showed up 7 minutes after that. None of us did anything extraordinary. We just didn't look away. That's what I'd want anyone watching this to take from it. Not that the world is full of monsters, though sometimes it is. Not that the system always works, because it often doesn't. And 4 months is a long time for a 6-year-old to wait. What I'd want you to take is this. Showing up is the whole thing. Staying awake to the people around you, asking one more question when something feels wrong, not talking yourself out of the discomfort of seeing clearly. That's it. That's the entire practice. Gracie painted a picture of her family last week and put it on my refrigerator. She's 7 years old, and she's already figured out something that took some people I know a lifetime to learn. If they learned it at all, family is not who you're assigned. It's who stays.